Hi, this is Anirban. I am a PhD student at Trinity College, Dublin. This is a joint work with Debasis and Owen. Here, I will present our work titled Relevance Models for Multi-Contextual Appropriateness in Point of Interest Recommendation. For the task of contextual point of interest, that is POI recommendation, a system needs to recommend a set of relevant POIs to a user based on the user's preference history and the current contextual constraints such as the current location, trip type, etc. Broadly, there are two types of contextual constraints, hard and soft. The location context of a user is an example of a hard constraint because the recommendations outside the city of a user's current location are of no use. On the other hand, other non-location type constraints are examples of soft constraints, as a relevant POI for a solo trip may also be partially relevant for a trip with friends, and so on. The vertical line in the figure separates the past context of a user from her present. If we know that the user went to Amsterdam, for example, in the past with her friends on holidays, and preferred pub and live music and so on, we can recommend relevant POIs that are appropriate for the current context. But in reality, this tree is essentially incomplete. That is, the non-location type contextual information is not present in user ratings. A key research challenge is then to estimate a likely path in the tree from a location to a number of POIs, that is, estimate the likely non-location intermediate nodes by utilizing the information from the review text. So, is it an IR problem or a recommender systems problem? It is potentially possible to apply a Rexis approach by considering the POIs as items. Several matrix factorization techniques can then be applied on the user item matrix. But in reality, this matrix is very sparse. The available ratings may even be non-existent. As a result, these methods won't really work well. And the problem essentially boils down to that of a content matching one between POIs in other contexts and the POIs in current contexts. We argue that it is more suitable to formulate the POI recommendation problem as a constrained IR problem, which is characteristically different from the scope of traditional recommender systems. In short, our proposed approach is an unsupervised IR-based one. Our research is reproducible as we do not use any external data, and is suitable for cold start scenarios as we do not use other users' ratings. From a general IR point of view, we assume that a user profile EU is composed of a set of NU profile PIs and an instance of the user's current context specified by the location and trip qualifiers LU and QU respectively. Each profile PI is a three-tuple consisting of a document D, a set of user-assigned tags T, and a user-provided rating R. For the location-only recommendation, we can simply define a set of candidate POIs to only the ones in the specific location and match the content with the POIs in the preference history. Note that the output of the phi function, such as with BM25 or a pseudo-relevance feedback method, doesn't depend on the non-location type qualifiers. For our experiments, we consider that there are three soft context categories, namely trip type, such as business or holiday, trip duration, such as day trip or night out, and accompanied by, whether the user is alone or with her friends. To incorporate these soft contexts, one needs to learn an association between a word from the review text or tag of a user profile and the likely historical context such as trip type, duration, etc., leading to the review. We can learn this association with the help of a knowledge base. There is a freely available resource which is composed of two different types of manually assessed information, single context-based and joint context-based. An example of a non-relevant pair is nightlife spot family with a lower score. Note that the appropriateness scores for single context-based pairs are real numbers, and the scores for joint context-based pairs are either 1, that is appropriate, or -1, otherwise. For our experimental setup, we have normalized these scores between 0 and 1, and formalized these two types of data as kappa S and kappa J. We use these term context association pairs to define a modified similarity score function psi. In contrast to the text-based phi function, this also takes into account the information from the soft constraints of the query context. Here, psi works as the contextual appropriateness measure of the term W for the given soft constraint vector QU. Note that the similarity or the degree of association between the terms W and S is specifically measured with the inner product between the vector representations of those two terms. To see the reason for using the maximum as the aggregate function, say for a given context, holiday, day trip, friends, the set of manually annotated relevant terms are baseball stadium, beer garden, salon, etc. For a candidate word such as pub, is similar to only one member of this seed set, namely beer garden, which means that other aggregation functions such as averaging can lead to a low aggregated value which is not desirable in this case. Before going to the proposed factored relevance model, let me briefly revise the traditional relevance model which many of you are already aware of. It involves estimating a term weight distribution PW given Q from a set of M top-ranked documents. This is basically IID sampling, and we compute the probability of sampling the term W from the relevance model R by the joint probability of observing W along with the query terms. Note that summation is over the top-ranked documents. In our case, we can consider the set of user-assigned tags as the query terms and estimate our relevance model for the user profile. Note that here the top-ranked documents are the ones in the user's preference history. And the psi factor works as the soft contextual appropriateness measure. Now we estimate another relevance model based on both the initial model and the top-ranked POIs in the current location. This equation represents a factored relevance model because estimating theta u, qu, lu requires estimating theta u, qu first, which acts as the factor model. As a generalization, we use a linear combination of the two relevance models, where gamma h is the trade-off parameter to control the relative importance of the two models. Here is an instance of FRLM term distribution. For the given set of tags, FRLM assigns higher weights to terms such as park, museum, which are clearly relevant for this particular example. Indeed, this model is also successful at capturing other relevant terms such as view, tree, canal, etc. We have experimented with a number of standard IR-based and Rexis-based baselines. We can see that including the Trip-qualifier-based information in the form of joint context mostly improves the POI retrieval effectiveness. We observe that joint context modeling is better than single context-based modeling, and it is in fact more effective while incorporated systematically within our relevance modeling framework. In addition to the improvement in recall, our proposed factored relevance model achieves high precision as well. Just to wrap up, we investigated the trade-off between exploitation and exploration, that is, the balance between two information sources, preference history and the information about the POIs in the current context. We model both hard and soft contextual constraints and bridge the vocabulary gap between preference history, POI, and soft contexts. Thank you for your interest. Please feel free to contact me if you have any questions and suggestions.